You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, your weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. We have a fun episode today, and I say we because we have a guest here today, someone that you have heard from before, but we are doing things a little differently today. So I'm going to let her first introduce herself and remind you all of where you can find her online.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me back on the podcast, Steph. For those who don't know me, my name is Fawna. I am the host of the Cat's Teat and Witchcraft podcast, and I myself am an eclectic Wiccan witch. And what I mean by that is I am a Wiccan, but I'm also a witch, but not all witches are Wiccan. For those who are in the community a little bit more and maybe not necessarily starting their journey, because there is a bit of confusion of what Wicca is versus general witchcraft or different types of witchcraft. So I like to make that distinction for people who might not be aware of those separations and kind of crossover. But like I said, I have a podcast of myself, and back and forth, me and Steph, we are on each other's podcasts and stuff. We go over a variety of topics, and I feel like if you are interested in very similar topics, feel free to check out my episodes. Steph has probably almost 40 more episodes than I do at this point because she's just on a roll. But I feel like the topics that we go over, even if it's not on purpose, they almost complement each other because we go over very similar topics and sometimes at different points. But because I'm more Wiccan based, but like to pull in other traditional types of witchcraft and diving into folk magic a little bit, and then her not being Wiccan, we have very different perspectives, but also a lot of similarities are found within our own separate podcasts and our opinions when we come together as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely. I think if you like the sort of content that I have and you haven't checked out Fawna before, then you absolutely should, because I think you would like that as well. And I think you would like getting the additional perspective from somebody that it does incorporate Wicca and a little more religion. And as I've mentioned before, there's no religion in my practice whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So to have the differing opinions and backgrounds just leads to a lot of fun information. So highly recommend that you check that out. And of course, I will have everything linked in the show notes. So you have the podcast, but you also have Instagram and Twitter at a website, yes. Right? All those things.
Yeah, I do. So my Instagram is at Cat's Teat and Witchcraft. On Twitter, it as Cat's Teat and Witch. And email is at catsteatandwitchcraftpodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, those are kind of the main ones. I have a Facebook page and a listeners group. So if you are interested in finding access to those, follow my podcast and go through the social media on how to access those, because I actually require people to answer entry questions for the safety of the listeners and to make sure it's not overloaded with people who are not listeners, because I made the Facebook page or the group specifically for listeners. And I have actually denied people who are like, oh, I didn't know it was connected to a podcast, because I want it to be focused on the podcast community specifically. So if that confuses people a little bit, if you've listened to stuff and you want to join the podcast group, I'd say listen to a couple of my episodes first and then kind of jump in, because the questions are specific to the things I talk about almost every episode.
Great idea. Smart to have some barriers in place, because Facebook can be like the wild.
Yeah, and there's a lot of scammers out there on Facebook and that go into Facebook groups that scam people with readings and divination and just like, oh, I have the answers for you. And then they DM you, and people are always like, well, they messaged me because they say they had a message. Most practitioners, if they are legit, will not reach out to you on Facebook Messenger. I guarantee that is a scam. And if you have any questions, go to their profile, go through their profile pictures. And a lot of the times you can tell within 4 profile pictures that they are not the same person. So anyone who's cautious about that, do that snooping, because when people message you like that, most people and like people like us who have podcasts and are on social media and stuff, who have communities, they're not going to, hopefully good ones aren't going to try to scam you and or try to give you readings and everything. And a lot of times they make fake profiles as well. So if you follow someone, double check if you think something looks funny, because they'll add little periods or hyphenations or spell something differently. And somehow they'll get a lot of followers, but it is scam as well. And I'm saying that really hardcore today because the past week, I've known like 4 people that I've followed who've had hackers or scam people copying their profiles.
Oh yeah, all the time. It's really annoying.
Yeah, I know someone who literally had to delete their entire music profile that was hacked, and they were like messaging people and stuff. So it was
The worst.
ridiculous.
Absolutely the worst. Yeah, it's terrible lately. So glad you mentioned that. So everybody, and I will have the correct links so everybody will have your correct information. So if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, you would have heard Fawna before, or if you are here because you are a listener of her, you've probably heard me on her podcast before. And generally, we have discussed a specific topic. Like I come up with an idea, whatever I want the episode to be around, and Fawna has lended her expertise. But since this is going to be more like one of the guest interviews, we are actually going to dive into Fawna's world a little bit more for this episode and let her kind of talk about what she practices and how it works for her, rather than be focused on one specific topic. And again, a lot of that Wicca background comes in, so it would be really interesting. So with all that said, Fawna, let's get into, you touched a little bit on eclectic Wicca. So yes. How did that start for you? When did that even come about? Did you start as a Wiccan?
Throughout my entire journey, I did not start out as a Wiccan or specifically identifying as a witch. I kind of dived a little bit more into crystals and essential oils. I was fresh in college and stuff like that, but I didn't go so hardcore to where I was involving myself with cult-like behaviors and different things and stuff. I still was very cautious about diving into those communities because I did notice off the back, specifically on like Tumblr and stuff. It was like right before I got off of Tumblr, because Tumblr went down a really weird rabbit hole and everything midway through the 2000 teens or whatever we call the previous 10 years. So I kind of trickled through that and just meditating and doing kind of things lightly. But previously, before that, I had wrote down my dreams. I would like kind of like figure how the messages I was getting for myself or processing my emotions and my anxieties and writing down my dreams and everything. But then I got into the crystals and that. And then I did yoga in college. But then when I graduated, I was like, I want to do more. I know there's more. I've graduated. I have a job that's full-time job that's consistent. I can start diving into things because I'm in my own household. I had my own apartment and everything. I was 22. And then I started looking up different like groups and religions and stuff that are in the area. And I went on Witchvox, which is no longer a usable source. They shut down a couple years ago just because of maintenance. And I found a local coven, and it is now today the one that I am an official member of. And it is an Eclectic Wiccan coven. So it has lineages. It has a sister coven that's actually on the West Coast, and we're on the East Coast. So it has a really cool lineage, which is really, really fun. And the difference between some of that, when people say like eclectic and everything, I get questions as well. Is it like Gardnerian or Alexandrian? What's the difference? And it's kind of hard to say if you've never been a part of those or you just haven't read specific books on those traditions and everything. But eclectic means what the word means. It kind of takes from the root of Wicca, and then it kind of evolved over time like a lot of religions do. And a lot of different religions have different sects of it to where it's either Orthodox or just different types of Christianity and stuff like that. So kind of the same process that's happened with Wicca. So mine pulls from traditional Wicca, but then kind of uses either bits from general witchcraft or the Temple of Witchcraft. I know we also pull from like Laurie Cabot and different things like that. And we don't just work with the traditional, I guess you can call Wiccan deities, just the god and the goddess, the horned god and goddess. So we also, and I work with other pantheons as well, and so do my other coven mates. So that's kind of just a little bit of a basic synopsis of how I got to where I am and kind of what my path is.
So I recently, in the last month or so, had an episode on polytheism
Mm-hmm.
and how that works within Wicca. So do you believe, since you say you work with other pantheons as well,
Mm-hmm.
do you believe that they are their own entities, or are they all go back to the god and goddess for you? Are those, say goddesses in whatever pantheon you're working with, are those all aspects of the singular goddess for you?
I'm not going to lie about this because I don't fully know, because some days I feel like it is and sometimes I feel like it isn't. I do feel like different energies have their own sources, but it doesn't mean they're not connected to either a larger source. And when I think of that, I feel like there's multiple and different types of energies that are connected to the universe. If maybe the universe is its own deity and there's like branches of different deities, but I still picture the universe as its own entity as well.
Yeah, because none of us know.
Yeah, exactly. So I sometimes don't like saying that I have a full set opinion on that because it changes and I question my own beliefs so frequently. And it also depends on different experiences and everything, because sometimes I've tried to work with something or within either the coven work or myself and I just don't feel something, or then other times I'll feel something that I haven't doing something before. So like it's this back and forth of my experiences and my questioning of how I experience the universe and the energies that I work with. I do work with the concept of the Wiccan god and goddess, but then I also work, like I said, with other pantheons. A lot on my own solitary work, I work with Norse deities on my own. And I've just kind of more recently been talking about that because there is a negative stigma that comes from people working with Norse deities and I know you just had that episode come out working with the Norse pantheon with your last guest and everything, and with things that go online and with the awful bits with white supremacy and different racist groups and like, was it Operation Werewolf and the different terms that are like kind of sneakily part of the community, but not like the community you actually want to be a part of, because they do either have racist or transphobic or different like nasty personas that they project on other people, like just other types of hate groups that are not within the Norse community. So I've just been recently opening up about that because of the stigma of it. And also some other things have been going on in the witch community of people who may or may not have been associated knowingly or not with said expected or known supremacists or people who are going down that rabbit hole you really don't want to get down to. And I'm feeling that even though I don't know too much about certain situations or certain organizations, they are out there and you need to be very careful. Even if it's not Norse pantheons, there are other groups that can get kind of weird and hide and mask themselves from the negative things that they actually do spread.
Yeah, absolutely true. But I think that's always a good thing to remind people of. It comes up with Norse paganism a lot and
yeah,
deities, unfortunately, that seems
especially in the past. Was it since, I guess, prior to World War II with Germany and the war and everything and the different polls but also a lot of that information was pulled from even their false sources. If you want to dive into history and everything, if you look into where those concepts came from, they were flawed in themselves, but people grasp onto those flaws for whatever reason that they're pulled into it. If it's how they grew up or just weird experiences that made them think these awful things about other people or treat people really weirdly, or if they're on a weird cusp of the way they treat people, all of that information about why people go down those routes is just false, because what we know about historical, if you actually look into it, has been disproven, but people still follow those weird paths and views, and it just pisses me off. Especially because I have runes tattooed on me and I am sometimes afraid that people are going to come up to me and be like, oh, are you like, give me like a weird side eye and everything. And like, if I want to like educate them on it, they're either going to be like, oh, okay. Or they're going to be like, no, stay away from me. So
that's exactly what Justin said in that episode about Norse
yeah. So I was listening to that. I was like, oh, thank God. other
Something
people
you have in
experience it.
common.
And I know they do, but hearing it makes me feel so much better because it's just like I struggle with that every day because I have my faith and I've been tattooed and permanently inked with things. But then there's also those people that can ruin anything from any community in the pagan or non-pagan and other religious realms as well.
It is very true. Well, since you work with then these Norse deities, and you said that's more in your solitary practice. Mm-hmm. So going back to being in a coven, your coven is their own kind of, like, each person is their own kind of eclectic, right? Do they all work with Norse paganism, or does it varies per person?
It does vary from person for their solitary work. We kind of, when we go through our different degrees, we kind of are taught to at least to research other deities, and if they approach you or you just find one that you call upon that you feel connected to, or kind of like test it out, like when you meet new friends, or kind of like speed date, like God speed dating, work with them, see how it works. If not, you don't have to keep up that connection or anything. So we have a variety of different people who come from different cultures, countries, and have different ethnicities. So it's really cool to have a coven that has people who have such diverse backgrounds and personalities. So there are people who work with Greek, Egyptian, Celtic, me with Norse. Those are kind of the main ones, but then the varieties, I think a couple of them work with different indigenous from different countries, different North American and South American indigenous energies as well. So, and like I said, we form those relationships, but also make sure we're knowledgeable on the culture and the meaning, and to make sure everything that is done respectfully, even if it's not from a country that your ancestors are from or one that you've maybe not visited yet. So we do in our coven, when we work with different deities, I know we try to do the research, make a connection, make sure it's respectful, because sometimes if you do rituals or we do things together, not every energy that I've worked with is like my preferred, but when you come together, we like to come together in the concept of in perfect love and perfect trust. So any things that might not vibe with us, we still provide with love and helpfulness to pursue the group magic that we're doing within a coven, because that's like the point of a coven, is working together, having that connection, aiding each other in magic and friendship as well. So not everything is like my preferred or their preferred. Not everyone might want to work with Norse deities, but the concept with the coven and having all these varieties of perspectives, we use that concept of perfect love and perfect trust, as above, so below, and stuff like that.
So what are some of the things that you do together? I know a lot of people are interested in covens in general, but then they don't know exactly what happens in a coven. And each coven is, has their own rules and stuff. But what are just like some of the things that you do together?
What we do through our lineage, we'll work with different types of moons depending on when it lands. So we usually do like one moon ritual a month. We'll work with the wheel of the year and the different Sabbats, the quarter and cross quarter days. So we kind of divide up who does what rituals and everything, which is really cool, because then we have a variety of types of rituals. Some have singing, some have dancing, some have meditating, some have chanting, some just have meditations and drumming. So we do a variety of things. Some rituals involve food, some don't, some are closed to only us, and other ones we have open to family and friends, depending on the type of workings that we're doing. So we don't generally do magic on Sabbats because it is a time of celebration. And then the other events we have are more magic focused.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun that you can invite friends and family and sort of open it up like that.
Yeah. And of course it's to like pagan friendly vaccinated people, because if someone comes with, if anyone has any medical conditions, we need to make sure everyone is safe, even physically. Magic isn't going to cure someone's illness or lifelong issues that they have, whatever it is. So we also, and not everyone likes this for whatever reasons, but we do require anyone who comes to be fully vaccinated, because we need to keep everyone safe, not just magically, like I said.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But the only people we don't allow come is children, because not everyone in our coven is comfortable around children. And children, and we've all talked about it, is like sometimes they can be distracting, especially when a lot of people are parents. I'm not a parent. I love kids, but having the conversations, like we all love kids, but we would feel distracted. And the parents and the mothers and fathers and other guardians, children are distracting when it comes to our magic work. So we are almost strictly all adults who are within the group, and our coven doesn't even allow people under the age of 22 to come through because we do serve alcohol.
That's smart. I had an episode on covens, and that was one of the things was that one of the coven red flags is that they have no restrictions and they allow everyone, and it doesn't matter what your age is. And that's a huge red flag for me, because the maturity level is so much different if you're 16
Exactly.
as opposed to if you're 26, and alcohol is one of those things.
Exactly. Because in a lot of witchcraft and even just Wicca in general, is not a religion that's afraid of sexual topics. And I'm not saying we're not like having like orgies or anything, but some of the stories that we tell are sexual in nature, or if it's like an origin story or how this became of this, or if we read certain mythologies. Not all mythologies or folktales are happy and like PG or anything. So some of the topics and the stories and things that we go over, or the magic, might talk about very adult content things. So it's also another thing. It's like, we don't need children asking, what's this? Or why do you have this chalice and have this athame and inserting it into it with rituals? Like, things can get really weird, and you don't want to have that birds and bees weird interpretation with your child when you're like, I'm trying to do magic and you're accidentally learning about sex. So even though it's symbolic, it's still, kids absorb things, and the topics are something that needs to be kept within the parents' control, and bringing someone else's child to ritual is just not what we do in our coven. I know maybe we might have in the future like picnic days, but we're not going to be doing rituals or anything.
Yeah,
we'll just be like going to a park and just having our friends and family come together. And at that point, that's not even a ritual. That's just us getting our families together, because we don't get the opportunity to do it.
Which is another important aspect that a coven can offer people, is just friendship and community with like-minded people. And that can be hard to find. And it doesn't always have to be magic and a ritual and full moon and cloaks and under the moonlight. It can really just be a picnic and gathering together with friends.
Oh yeah. And we have our own personal like group chats and everything. And they're wild sometimes. It's so funny. Just we'll support each other with talking about different various parts of our lives and everything. And those who have been in longer or newer into the groups, or who are just seekers and stuff, we just some crazy shenanigans that go on. We're all adults and we all are respectful for everyone, but some goofy things are like said and shared, and just, it is a great friendship. And just because it's magical doesn't mean it needs to be formal, unless I would say like when you're in circle, you can always have a little fun. We always giggle if like someone stutters or said something goofy, or we realize, oh shit, we made a mistake. And then we just like catch up on it and then we giggle. But that friendship is really important, because if you don't trust who you are working with, that is not in perfect love and perfect trust. And you don't want to be working with other people's energies that are stinky. You don't want to work with stinky energy.
It makes sense to me.
Like in the nicest way. They're like, I know a lot of people online, they're like, oh, I just want to look for a like-minded group of friends. And you can totally do that. And because there are people who have covens that are just people who come together. And then there are more formal covens, which I would say mine's a more formal concept of a coven, because it's like a membership. I'm not saying like fees and stuff like that, but like there's bylaws. There are things that you have agreed upon. There are certain things that you can and can't do. There's privacy agreements and stuff like that, because you don't want to out someone if they don't want to be outed, but also the privacy of the homes that we might be going to, or the places that we're going to, or the things that we talk about each other in private. So there's a lot of privacy that you have to be careful with, and you can't just accept, or shouldn't accept, anybody and everybody just because they say they're a witch, because not all witches have good intentions or the same views as you. And there are groups that can be toxic and negative, or bring in or try to infiltrate for whatever weird reason they have. So you always have to be careful.
And, you know, speaking of being careful and finding the right people, does your coven, which I'm assuming that they do, have a longer term initiation process so people can get to know you and you can get to know the members that are already there and you can test out each other's energy?
Yes. For ours, we do have like an application process. When we have essentially like openings or we finish the courses that we have, because we have various degrees and we just aren't like nonstop signing people up for classes, because that's too much for us and the high priestess and to keep up with having like 50 million different classes going on at the same time. So when we do have open, I guess, not open enrollment is like the application process for courses if we have like things opening up. So like say they would apply or send an email from the website that we have that they can reach out to it. And then they would send an email to our high priestess. She would have a little bit of correspondence with them, and depending on what the conversation is or what they're looking for, she may just say, hey, if they say something that doesn't line up immediately, she might be like, hey, I don't think it's going to be a good fit, or hey, maybe look into these things. This might be a better fit. Because if someone's looking for an all female or an all male, or they're looking for just a course, but not to actually be a part of the coven, and they're just looking for a resource, that can be a reason for her to say, hey, it's not going to work, or hey, here's another source or just another direction you can go that might work better for you. But if she does feel that it might be a good direction, we'll have group gatherings where a couple of us, for safety, will go to a public place and meet whoever's interested. And if we feel like meeting them, we get good energy, we might invite them to an open event. And if we like them there and the rest of the coven likes them, we'll be like, hey, do we think they would be a good fit for our course? Do we feel safe? Do you feel comfortable? Did anyone have any weird interactions, or did you get any weird vibes, or did they like slip up or say something? Because people can be really sneaky. So we need to have this dialogue with our entire group, because if one wrong thing is said that makes someone uncomfortable, it could affect the entire coven. So we do have that process. And then from there, we have our courses. And then there's like the first 6 months, because we do a year and a day. We do the first 6 months, which is up to like a midterm, and then the rest of it, after you really know it's for you and we think you're really for us, then we'll do to the rest of it. And then after the year and a day, you've made your decision, is it a commitment you really want to make, then someone would be initiated.
Is there a reason behind the year and a day? I know that is like the most popular time frame for Wiccan covens, but I don't think I've ever known if there's a particular reason for that.
I'm not sure of the original history of why it was started, but I know why we do it is because it gives someone an entire time to really feel dedicated. It lets us get to know them. But depending on the curriculum that you're going through, if you do like classes on like a bi-weekly or a monthly basis, or however your organization does it, it's almost like school. It's like you learn about the basics, you learn how to work with the group, you kind of figure out what the tradition is, and it ensures that you, like I said, you're dedicated and you have a base knowledge of the main things that everyone's doing. Because if you just throw someone in and say, hey, just read some books and you'll figure it out on a way, that can throw everyone off. It's like when you're on a job, it takes time to really learn what you need to do. And if you don't figure out the basics, it might cause some stumbling and some other difficulties if you're not aware of the dynamic of everything that is going on. So it all depends on different things. And I know I've talked to different people and they're like, oh, well, my group didn't do this, but you're doing that. Or, oh, you learned this. I've never even heard about that. But then they've been in their coven for years and years, and they've just never done something in particular. So knowing what the rest of the coven knows, at least the basics, and then you continue to like grow, it allows everyone to be on the same page as well. Because it's like if someone went to a public pagan event, it's going to be kind of difficult to really know what's going on, because there's so many different traditions and variations of doing things. It might cause, like I said, a stumbling and be just, you're kind of like, oh, what the hell is going on? You're like, oh, when you're with a smaller group that is trying to have certain goals, having that like-mindedness is just beneficial either way.
Yeah. And I mean, I've never been in a coven, not anything I've had a desire to do, but that absolutely makes sense to me, that it's not even just like, they don't take it personally. I was what I'm trying to say. If a coven doesn't accept you if you apply to one in your area. It really is a match of energy. So they are looking out for your best interests as well as their own coven, but they really are looking out for you too, and realizing that there's nothing wrong with you as a person. You just have different beliefs and goals, and you aren't the right fit at that time. But both of those things are important, because if they just let anyone in, then you're going to be unhappy. They're going to be unhappy. So it sounds really good. The way that you guys do it sounds smart, but obviously you've been around for a few years now. So years, actually, not a few.
Exactly. Yeah. I've known my coven since 2015, and that's essentially when I started my Wiccan path and everything. So I've known them from my beginning, and even some of their beginnings as well, where they were kind of still maybe just past their year and a day. So I've known them for a really long time. So it's really fun to see everyone grow and evolve and stuff like that. Because I started in my early 20s, and now I'm in my late 20s. And they've even said how, just even though I was technically adult then, they can so easily see the growth that I have had, because we have a variety of ages. And it's really cool to have those different ages, cultures, genders, identities, and stuff. And we all can come together, like I said, in perfect love and perfect trust, and aid each other with positive energy and love and communication, just being there magically and not magically.
Oh, that's a really nice community to have. I mean, I think about that sometimes. I've mentioned on the podcast before, we've talked about it before. My season 1 co-host Tara is still on occasionally and talks about stuff. And she isn't a part of a coven, but she has a lot of pagan friends that she does things with for the various Sabbats, because she is Wiccan based in her practice as well. So they do a lot of group gatherings for that. And I'm like, oh, I think that would be fun. But then I know myself, and I'm like, but I don't know that I like people that much. I think I'm just happier by myself.
We actually have a lot of introverts in our coven, which is really funny. They're really introverted, but yet they still work with a coven. It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it takes all kinds of personalities, right? Because you can't have all extroverts and leaders, because it's not all leadership positions. So,
exactly.
Introverts to balance things out, which is funny.
It really does help with the balance.
Yeah, I think so too. I have actually a very extroverted personality. I just don't like people that much. I like my people, but I'm very extroverted. I am fine in, big social situations. I get a lot of energy from being around people. When I come home, I'm like, I don't really like people all that much. I'm very particular about the people that I do like.
Same thing. I sometimes will say I'm an extroverted introvert. If I'm in an environment that I'm good in, I'm good. But if I go to a bar with my friends, if I'm in an environment that's not for me, I'm the quiet person at the bar drinking a Coke, just kind of swaying. And my boyfriend would be like, come on, let's stand up. Are you okay? Are you having fun? I was like, yeah, I'm just chilling. It's just not my scene. I'm just chilling.
Yeah, well, it takes all kinds to be in a coven that works together. So I'm glad that you found that. And I think a lot of listeners will probably come to you with questions, because that is something that I get a lot of, how do I find a coven? How do I join a coven? I'm like, I do not know all of those answers. I can tell you what the red flags are of what not to look for and what you should be looking for. But I have never been in one myself, and they are not all Wiccan, by the way. So, Fawna is Wiccan and very familiar with that if you have questions, but there are covens out there that are all across the board. So definitely don't have to be Wiccan to be in a coven. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around the words witchcraft, Wiccan, coven, pagan. So it's good that you covered that in the beginning, that not all witches are Wiccans and all of those good things that everyone should know.
Yeah, exactly.
So when it comes to stuff outside of the coven, your solitary practice, what are some of the things that you do in your day-to-day life, in your witchcraft practice or your Wiccan religion? I know not every single day is going to be exactly the same, but for the most part, what are some daily things you like to do?
A lot of the things just start out with me making my coffee, just kind of focusing on the energy of the coffee. One thing I did start doing is, it all happened 2 months ago. And I can't remember if it was on the last time we were talking or if it was with someone else, that I accidentally bought a bag of whole bean coffee. I was like,
yes, I remember that.
I don't have a grinder. So I bought a grinder. And normally I have a crap ton of tea. So I do a lot of it when I do my tea, but for me, coffee is for morning and tea is for like the evening. But like I started like grinding my own coffee beans. And I'm like, this kind of adds an element of energy into my coffee. So when I'm grinding the coffee, I kind of think a little bit more about putting my own energy into it. So that's kind of a small thing that I've done in the mornings a lot. And then in my office is where I have my altar. It's kind of separated. I guess you could say I either have multiple altars or my entire office is a giant altar with different sections. I have my main altar that has my matron and my patron. And then I have actually right now I have a chakra altar to rotate through different chakras. And also I have a third deity that I work with that is energetically the opposite of my matron and my patron, who actually are two death deities. I unintentionally connected to two death deities as my main ones.
Oh, wow.
And my third one, I feel like it balances us out and is more of a spring fertility one, which also I wouldn't have thought would been one that I would have worked with, but is one I connected to really quickly.
Oh, that's really nice. That's interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a balance of like to death, but then a life-giving one or an energy one. And then I have 7-day candles that I have lit for them on their altar because I have everything actually on the wall for them. I have some statues that I ordered, ravens. I actually have some wood burned pieces as well that I had with hand. I used like transfer paper. I printed out some images of some pictures online. And this is stuff that I don't sell. So if anyone wants like ideas of things that they can do for your altar, definitely take this. But when I'm saying this specifically, because I just found pictures on Google, and then I transferred them onto a piece of wood and burned them and kind of painted it and everything. But I don't sell them and it's just for personal use. So I wouldn't recommend anyone doing that if they're trying to make money off of it. You have to make your own images. But since this is just for personal, I put my energy into the wood burning, into the painting, and getting it all taken care of. So that's kind of an energy infused pieces as well, because most of the stuff I have isn't handmade for them, except for the individual portraits of them that are burned. And then I have my shower ritual or my bath rituals, depending on if I take a bath or a shower, and I will picture negativity being washed away from me. I'll envision a light and just kind of like do a scrub. And depending on the type of soaps that I have, I've been getting more like handmade soaps and kind of like picking the smell or the herbs based off of kind of the energy that I want to get off from it. So I kind of will get more citrusy smells because that's like a pick me up and stuff like that. And that sweet smell kind of sweetens my day. So even if it's not necessarily the actual metaphysical use of them, I'm using the scent and the feeling of that soap as my pick me up and kind of more of a morning encouragement as well.
Well, that sounds nice.
So that's more of my daily things. I don't do spells all the time, but I'm reading on a daily basis. So I have more of my religious work that is more of a daily or a weekly thing. And then my spell work is as needed. I don't always need spells. And if I do more energy work, maybe I have specific candles that I put runes on or bind runes or sigils and stuff. And I'll put oil and energy and herbs, and I'll do a spell or a ritual for a particular candle, and I'll light it when I need something. A good idea for that I like to do is make a money candle. And a lot of people like to do money bowls or different things like that. So if I'm like focusing on work, I'm like, hey, I really want this thing with work to go by, even though it's not necessarily me asking for like extra money. Money is associated with work, and work is associated with money because you got to work to get money. So I'll light my green money candle, green being the color of earth. Earth element is grounding. Grounding can mean your job or stability or the money, and all of those things allow you to live and eat, feel safe, and essentially be grounded, in my perspective. So I'll work with the earth element a lot in the color green, because that is where my life mostly focuses on, not necessarily like being a millionaire, but focusing on my job, because I'm a very job corporate person. So I need that extra energy, and I'll do, I guess, a lot of candle work with herbs and oils as well. And I'll infuse those tools with a spell or a quick ritual, like I said, and I'll do that more often than a more complicated ritual, because I don't, maybe it's just because I'm older and I'm not involved with drama, and I try to be very picky with who I talk to and what I'm involved with. And I've been lucky to not have like accidents or a lot of things and crazy things go on for now. I'm not saying it won't change in the future. There might be a period where I need to do spells more often, but at the moment, I do spells maybe once or twice a month. And a lot of that is with the coven. I don't always do personal spells because half the time the coven work that we do hits what I need anyway. And I feel like that's another good thing with working with the coven is sometimes we just know what we need and what our coven needs, and it just kind of works out for the better.
Yeah, I've mentioned that before, that it takes a lot of time and energy, that are two things that, only you can give to do spells and rituals. So
exactly.
I understand like the desire to practice, but when you're turning every single thing into a spell, like that is how you get burnout. Burnout is when doing like a spell every single day. Not everything requires a magical response, so it's okay to only do spells every once in a while, like save it for when you really need it, and then you have a good energy store ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes when I like cook, I'll grab a certain herb and like, ooh, this might be good to use, and I'll sprinkle it on my salmon or something. I like using rosemary, and rosemary is one of my favorites. So when I grab the rosemary, I'm like, ooh. And then I might like think about some energy and do some Reiki and stuff on that. But like, I don't need it all day, every day. Maybe that's just me. Like I said, I don't have a bunch of crazy things going on that may or may not require a spell. But most of it is just a lot of personal work right now.
And a lot of easier day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, just because depending on if you're a parent or if you're working or if you just have a lot of other things going on, maintaining a relationship, there's a lot of things you got to balance. And if you're throwing in a religion plus a craft plus your job plus your significant other or children or other activities that you do that may or may not be within your own household, it's a lot to keep up with. And a lot of people get burnt out with that, or they feel like they have to do so much to justify being called a witch. I would say,
which is crazy.
And I don't want us to call, like, sometimes I'll use the word like armchair witch or something like that. Like, maybe if you've been studying for 20 or 30 years and you've never done a spell, maybe you're not a witch and you just want to be a witch, because there is an energy and an effort you kind of have to put into it. Just sitting there and thinking about something doesn't automatically make you something. I can think about making a music video, but it doesn't make me a director, even if I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos or movies or music videos. But just because you are knowledgeable in something doesn't mean you are something, but it's the energy and effort that does. And I know that might make some people mad, but just because you don't do it every day doesn't mean you're not either. Say you only have one day a week to really dedicate it, or say you have children or you're a single parent and it's the weekends of the month or every other week to where you have your household to yourself, and those are the days or the weeks that you have to you. That's perfectly fine. Like I said, it doesn't need to be every day because you don't want to burn out. But also, if you don't do it at all, maybe there's a different definition for you.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And I know some people don't like that, but it's the reality of just because you think about something doesn't mean you are that.
That's accurate. Yeah. So the last thing that I want to ask, that I usually ask my guests, I am actually going to make this a two-parter for you because I already know that you know the second answer. So the first question I'm going to ask is if you could offer one piece of advice to a beginner witch, whether that is beginner to a coven, beginner to Wicca, whatever it is, what is your beginner advice? And then the second question that I'm going to ask specifically to you is what is one of your, or you can name a couple, favorite book recommendation, because I know you have so many. And if I ask you like the unending list, it's going to be 100 books long. So if you were to narrow it down, what would they be?
Okay. So the first one, I would say read books or listen to audiobooks YouTube and podcasts are your best friends when you are starting out with the craft. We are fortunate nowadays they have the internet. Use those sources. I will also say with that, not everything you hear or read is the truth, or it doesn't mean that it isn't out of date. Like the idea of saying smudging versus smoke cleansing, the use of sage or not using sage, in cultural appropriation versus cultural respecting, and different things like that. So there are things like a lot of books are older that are great sources, but it doesn't mean that they aren't older, because the way we perceive our non-witch culture versus our witch culture, and as new things have come about and old traditions kind of die out, traditions change. The traditions that we're doing, most of them are more modern than practitioners want to think. A lot of things are being revived and slowly found through historical documents and things that are being found out through the decades through historians and archaeologists and everything. But a lot of the magic we are doing is newer than not. Some of it is a couple 100 years old, some of it is 1,000 years old. A little bit of it might be a little bit older that we are slowly learning through translations and things that are resurfacing. But a lot of the witchcraft we are doing today is very, very modern. And a lot of it has been influenced post-American Civil War and the wars that were in Europe with the seance movement and stuff like that. There's the Golden Dawn, a Thelema, then they came Wicca. And we all know Gerald Gardner wanted to claim that Wicca was this ancient religion, and it's not. It's been around since the 1950s, guys. Maybe the 40s at the oldest. That's not that old. Our grandparents, my grandparents were alive and born before the establishment of Wicca. My grandfather is older than Wicca, and he's still alive. So take certain things with a grain of salt, and they just didn't have all that information back then, but now we have more information than Gardner did. So make sure you cross-reference your sources. And I'm going to take this to transition into the second half of it, which is book recommendations. So let me look across my room with all the books that are facing me.
And I should say that you are always sharing and giving recommendations. So if anybody would like to hear more than the list you're about to give me, then they should definitely go follow you, because you're like me, where you are just constantly reading, whether or not it is within your practice at the moment. You will read it anyway, just to consume the information.
Yes, because I have a couple books on my shelf that are books that I absolutely hate and would like to burn, but I'm never going to burn them because that's wrong. It's always something good to keep because I can reference it.
Yeah, you do the reading, you do the research, and because you have the podcast too, you also read on all of these topics. So I know that you have a billion book recommendations. So if anybody's looking for more, definitely go follow Fawna, because you will have more. But okay, we'll let you go with just a couple of yours.
So the first book that I know that a lot of people might like is, and it's a newer book, and it's by J. Allen Cross, and I've interviewed him on my podcast as well, and it's the American Brujeria book. I like this book because it goes over topics like cultural appropriation and the older perspective of brujeria within Mexico and South America, and also the transition, and it's called American Brujeria because he, as a Mexican American, has essentially multiple aspects of his personal and family culture, and he explored and did research on how there's a lot of practitioners that are American, or they've immigrated to America, or work with witchcraft, or their ancestors worked with witchcraft or magic, or they're just finding their own individual selves working with it. And it's a really cool blend of Mexican culture in stories and experiences with Catholicism as well, because a lot of places in Mexico are very heavily Catholic, and his background as well touches upon different parts of Catholicism and how it is involved with brujeria and also Catholic American culture as well. So that is a great book. Even if you don't practice brujeria specifically, it is an amazing book. And I have learned a couple things in there, and I now use sunflower oil for my spells as my main carrier oil because of Jay. And another author, I would say, I'm just going to list 3 authors that I feel that are really good because they have quite a few books each. There's Thorn Mooney. She is a Gardnerian Wiccan, and she has a couple books of her own. There is Jason Mankey as well. He, I think, is Gardnerian, and he has a bunch of books as well. He has co-written and written a lot of his own. And then I said Thorn, Jason, and then not specifically a particular tradition of Wicca. I think he might be Wiccan or have a Wiccan based background, and that is Christopher Penzack. He has so many books that touch on so many topics, and he also has, I think, online courses and just a different community, and I think it's called the Temple of Witchcraft. So look into that. There's so much good information. It might be a little bit Wiccan influence, so just be aware if you're not Wiccan, but the other information that is not kind of Wiccan influence is amazing. So I'm just saying the amount of books on the variety of topics is great. So I decided to list those authors because they are actively writing, active on social media, and actively involved with modern concepts and information. So it's not just everyone recommending Buckland's Big Blue Book or Scott Cunningham, which I reference and use all the time, but sometimes people don't want to read the old white man books. I get tired of those sometimes too. So having a little bit of variety, or at least people who are still living and very up to date on the current witch culture, makes a difference sometimes, especially for those who are very particular in who they read and their reasoning for or not for reading certain people.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point because I love Scott Cunningham's books. Like, they have been so helpful. There are ones too that I reference all the time, the encyclopedias. But that is true that Scott Cunningham has passed away. So there is no sort of updates to that information. And when it's, in that encyclopedia format, like Encyclopedia of Herbs and Oils, then that's one thing. But for, when they're talking about the different traditions and religions and things, those are things that change and need updating. So it is nice that you gave all these modern,
because some of those older writers, even though I still use and reference them too, but I'm very particular, I'll leave notes. It's like, oh, this is an old biased viewpoint, this is an old thing, because some of those older writers do have the mindset, this is the way, this is my way, this is how you're supposed to do it. Sometimes we see historical inaccuracies, but a lot of those inaccuracies is because we didn't have the information to disprove something, but now we do. It's been 30-40 years since some of these books were written, so we do have updated things with different sources, so just be careful.
And I do think some people are put off by the older books because they are very authoritative in how they speak, and it's kind of, and some people think that it feels like they're talking down to you in those books, and they really don't appreciate the tone. And I think that tone is just how majority of those books were written then.
There's a book right now that's maybe only about 25-30 years old that I'm reading, that I'm using. It was recommended to me and I'm reading it. It has a lot of great content, but it gives me that feeling where it's like, I don't like, it's really repetitive, or like how they start the same, every paragraph the same, like, oh, you should already know this, you should already know this, you should already know this. Just like, I understand this is an advanced witch book, but Jesus Christ, like, I'm saying that as a witch, Jesus Christ, like, what? You're literally making me wanting to throw this out and scream at you. Like, stop talking down to me. You're being condescending. But it does have other like good exercises and stuff in the book. But I'm still reading it. Even though it pisses me off, I'll do like a frowny emoji face in there and be like, what the fuck? Like, to like, I'll like annotate in my book. So if I reference something, be like, oh, this is what I didn't like. These are things I do. This is what connects to this. This is what this reminded me of. Let me re-reference or find a different source or something else, blah, 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 whatever the thought process is at the time.
Yeah, I waffle back and forth between book, if I don't like a book, of just, finishing it or not finishing it for the sake of respecting my time. And I logically, mentally, I understand that I should just like put it down and just stop and go on to something that I like, but I can't do it. I have to finish it. It's just, it's in my nature. I cannot not finish it.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if it's terrible. So I feel you.
There are a lot of bad books out there, and a lot of, I'm going to say not all witchcraft books are good witchcraft books. A lot of them are just published because they have pretty covers, or someone wanted a deal. Either they approached their publisher, or the publisher wanted to make a pretty penny off of a social media influencer, witch or magician. So be careful with some of the books that you buy. A lot of them are just really repetitive, and there's thousands and thousands of the same beginner books that say the same shit over and over again, which is really annoying.
That is true. And you are allowed to have your own opinion on all of the books. So even if there was something recommended today and you hate it,
I know a lot of people that don't like Christopher Penzack because he does have a Wiccan influence, but then they miss out on a lot of other good information because I would say even as a Wiccan, certain things I've read in some of his books, I'm like, come on, man, like really, like I've done that. But then he has, I would say 90% or more of his stuff is like amazing. It's just, but then he still has his own opinion. So
yeah, of course, they're all tainted with each individual's own opinion and practice.
Yeah.
Well, I will have all of those books and authors linked at the show notes at witchwednesdays.com to make it easier for you to find, as well as all of Fawna's links that we mentioned at the beginning. But thank you so much for being here today and letting me take more of your time than I intended when we started this recording.
No problem.
But thanks so much for being here, and we look forward to having you again because I know we will talk soon.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
And I will see you all next week.
This podcast was made using Anchor by Spotify. It's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Anchor lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. Then you can distribute your podcasts to the most popular listening platforms, including Spotify, with a single tap. Anchor is also the only place that you can publish video podcasts to Spotify. With Anchor, creators can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Need even more? Subscribe to Patreon and YouTube for exclusive bonus content. Order a themed witchcraft box every month through Witch Wednesdays on Etsy. Be sure to follow on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast. Find all these links and more at witchwednesdays.com.